Malcolm Raines wasn't the type of CEO who liked sitting on high floors reviewing reports. But no matter how grounded he tried to stay, eventually his leather shoes had grown used to carpeted floors, where the scent of coffee from an automatic machine in back-to-back Zoom meetings had become the standard. Every Monday morning, when he stepped onto the 17th floor of Raines Foods HQ, he reminded himself that he was once a mechanic, once washed dishes at Newark Airport, once slept on a folding chair with a reflective jacket for a pillow. And then, bit by bit, he forgot, until that email appeared. The subject line was plain, unadorned. Gate B14, she needs a break. Literally. No sender name, no signature, no attachment, just a single paragraph. We don't need another dollar an hourly wage. We just need to be allowed to cough without losing shifts. I'm not writing this to demand anything. I just hope someone sees. Malcolm read it over and over, as if something in those words still hadn't revealed itself. The phrase, be allowed to cough, a basic human reflex, now sounded like some sort of luxury. He pulled up the internal reports. Nothing flagged under employee health concerns at the Pensacola branch. Then he flipped to the resignation logs. 8 people had quit in the past 45 days, most citing non-response to overtime requests or unauthorized absences. Everything looked too clean, too tidy, too unbelievable. 3 days later, without informing a single executive, Malcolm shaved his beard, dyed his gray hair dark brown, put on cheap reading glasses, bought a pair of nameless, slip-resistant shoes, and applied as a temp worker at his own branch, under the name George Riley. A new uniform was shipped from the Orlando warehouse. A charcoal polo, a wrinkled apron, and a name tag with a typo. Gurge. He didn't fix it. Wednesday, 5 a.m. Pensacola Airport was still half asleep. The overhead fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over the food court, making it feel like a docking bay on a distant ship. He passed 2 TSA officers switching shifts, avoided eye contact with an old security guard who had once greeted him during the grand opening 3 years back. He arrived exactly on time. Not late, not early, just enough to go unnoticed. The back kitchen of a place called Sky Bite Express was narrow like a cave. The air was thick with the smell of fryer oil, baking powder, and processed meat, trapped in a space where no wind passed through. Malcolm weaved past some cardboard boxes and reached the prep table, where he noticed a figure crouched beneath a tray rack. It was a woman, her braided hair tucked neatly, her polo shirt smudged with grease. She was coughing. Not the casual kind from choking on water, but a throat-squeezing cough that shook her frame. Her eyes were red, her hands still holding a pair of tongs. When she heard footsteps, she looked up and forced a smile. "You the new guy?" Her voice was sandpaper rough. He nodded. "George," he said shortly. "Talia," she replied, then turned away to cough into a tissue. "Stand up straight." Another voice cut through, cold as an ice wall. Malcolm turned around. A man in his 40s, athletic build, white dress shirt, Bluetooth headset in one ear, clipboard in hand, walked by like no one else existed. "George, right?" He didn't look at him, just nodded absently. "Follow me. You're on Fry Station today. Don't cause problems." Before Malcolm could respond, the man had already disappeared into a corner near the walk-in freezer. "That's Dean," Talia said, voice still hoarse. "Store manager. Don't argue, don't ask. And most of all, don't cough." Half joke, half warning, but it chilled Malcolm to the core. The next 4 hours were a constant chorus of ding sounds, knives chopping, receipt printers whirring, and customers yelling from the counter. No breaks, no water, no laughter. Talia coughed more as the kitchen got hotter. She put a cold towel on the back of her neck whenever Dean's back was turned, then rushed back out whenever an order came in. Malcolm tried to memorize the chicken burrito recipe, but the order screen kept glitching and the recipe board was so faded it looked like it had never been replaced. The guy working next to Malcolm was named Luis. Gentle smile, hands moved like a machine. He whispered, "Don't let Dean see you lag. He'll humiliate you in front of the customers." Malcolm just nodded. Around 11:30 a.m., Talia could no longer hide her dizziness. She grabbed the prep counter for balance. Dean walked by, glanced at her, and said like speaking to an empty chair, "If you collapse here, clean it up yourself." She shook her head. "I just need to step out for a minute." Dean shrugged. "Go ahead. But if you're not back in 10, don't ask about next week's shifts." Malcolm left the fry station and followed her out back, where Talia was sitting behind a plastic trash bin, struggling to breathe. He handed her a water bottle. She didn't take it. "I've got a daughter. If I lose hours, I won't have enough for her asthma meds this month." Malcolm sat beside her, silent. Talia didn't look at him, just spoke steadily. "I'm not weak. I'm just tired." He understood. A kind of exhaustion that wasn't just physical, but from living in a system where everything good always seemed meant for someone else. That afternoon, Malcolm scribbled in a small notebook, "I built this system, and now it doesn't even recognize me. Nobody here needs a hero. They just need space to breathe." That night in a hotel break room near the airport, he reopened the old email from Gate B14. Under the dim light, he added one more line at the bottom. "I see it now. Monday shifts are where illusions of progress dissolve the fastest. If the first day is the collision between expectation and reality, then the second is when reality grinds down whatever's left of your belief." Malcolm understood that from his dishwashing days, when his shoes were still soaked in soap water and his back ached from never getting to sit. He thought he'd outgrown that cycle. But at Skybite Express, Pensacola, in 2025, that past returned, vivid and breathing. Only this time, he couldn't pretend not to see it. 5:05 a.m. Malcolm pushed the back door open with his shoulder. A burst of cold air from the freezer greeted him like an unwelcome slap. Inside, the scent of unchanged fryer oil, thawing deli meat, and damp plastic fused into something nameless, only felt. Talia was already there. Her eyes were more sunken than the day before. A thin medical mask, clearly reused too many times, partially covered her pale, grayed skin. She didn't speak, just nodded slightly when she saw Malcolm. He meant to ask her something, but Dean's voice echoed from the front, loud as a slap against a glass wall. "If you cough again today, Talia, I'm pulling your entire week." I don't need someone doing me a favor by dropping dead in my kitchen. No one in the kitchen reacted, just the clatter of a skillet slammed onto the counter and the steady hum of the receipt printer. Malcolm turned toward Ruth, who was tapping in orders in the corner. She didn't look up, as if those words hadn't been said, or worse, as if they'd been said so often, they'd lost the power to shock. Luis, the young worker Malcolm met yesterday, was fumbling with the POS system. His hand trembled slightly when a customer asked about a gluten-free combo. He tapped the wrong key 3 times and printed out 2 receipts. Dean appeared like he'd been summoned by the scent of error. "That's the 3rd time this week," he growled. "I don't pay people who can't read a screen." Luis flushed. I haven't been shown how to exactly, and I was never trained to tolerate stupidity," Dean snapped, waving the receipt like a court summons before turning away. Malcolm stepped forward, placing a hand on Luis's shoulder. "I'll walk you through it on break. I've used this system before. It's just a little different." Luis looked at him with a mix of gratitude and hesitation. He managed only a soft, "Thanks, George," then turned back to the screen, pressing each button like it was a moral test. Around 9:40, Talia started swaying. She was mopping the back kitchen when she suddenly collapsed, gripping the metal rack. No one heard her fall. The industrial exhaust fan swallowed every soft sound. Malcolm was carrying a tray of frozen food when he noticed. He dropped the tray and ran to catch her. Talia murmured, "I'm fine. Just dizzy." But her forehead was ice cold. He helped her into the walk-in freezer, the unofficial hiding spot for anyone needing a private cry. He grabbed a cold towel from the ice bin and pressed it to her neck. "You need to rest today." She shook her head. "Number, if I don't get back before Dean checks, I'll lose next week's shifts. I already owe 3 days of daycare." Malcolm clenched his jaw. He couldn't reveal who he was. Not yet. But there was one thing he could do. He stepped outside, pretending to carry a tray of food, and nudged the emergency temperature sensor, a move that triggered an alert system-wide, flagging the freezer as malfunctioning. When Dean rushed in to inspect, Malcolm blocked the door and said, "I dropped the tray. The door stayed open too long. I've got it under control. Dean narrowed his eyes. The new guy knows emergency protocol? Malcolm replied, I used to work Dallas. This stuff's familiar. Dean hesitated for a beat, then muttered, Don't break anything else. Talia remained in the freezer corner for another 20 minutes. When she came out, she didn't say a word, but her eyes met Malcolm's. A small nod, just enough to say she knew he had shielded her. And he understood she had just used those 20 minutes to buy herself 20 more days of survival. At the end of the day, Dean logged an internal note. Talia shows signs of feigning fatigue to avoid peak hours. Commitment to be reviewed next week. Malcolm saw it as he passed the desk. He didn't touch it, just picked up a pen, and beneath that line, wrote a single word. Noted. That evening, Malcolm sat in the break room, staring at the wrinkled shoes on his feet. Sweat still clung to the collar of his shirt. He wrote in his notebook, Here, sweat earns more respect than oxygen. But no one ever taught me that to survive, people must learn how to cough in silence. Steaming, others count espresso shots like clockwork, but only a few notice the precision in every wrist movement, in every task executed without needing a reference guide. Ruth Delgado was that kind of person, living like a line of code no one could read anymore. Yet without her, the whole system wouldn't run. Tuesday morning at Skybite Express began with an order to rearrange the stockroom. Dean gave no explanation. He just handed Luis a crumpled sheet of paper and ordered, Reorganize all the sauce boxes. From today on, stack everything by lot number, not expiration date. Malcolm furrowed his brow. By lot? Luis didn't hide his confusion either. But expiration's easier for tracking spoilage, isn't it? Dean didn't answer, just smirked and walked off, as if logic were a privilege, not a tool. An hour later, Luis was lost in the freezer. The sauce boxes didn't have clear lot labels. Product codes were smudged, blurred by condensation. Malcolm found him circling the shelves like a blade that had slipped its axle. You need someone who knows the codes, he said quietly. Luis nodded, a little embarrassed. Ruth. Ruth knows all the codes. Doesn't even need the chart. Malcolm walked over to the coffee bar corner. Ruth Delgado, 64 years old, salt and pepper hair tied neatly in a bun, gloves on, was pouring espresso shots with the focus of a classical artist. Excuse me, Ms. Ruth, Malcolm said hesitantly. The sauce codes. Do you happen to know which lot is the freshest? Ruth didn't look up, just gave a slight nod, wiped her hands and walked straight to the freezer without asking another question. In under 2 minutes, she pulled exactly 3 boxes from the middle shelf and pushed them toward Luis. These 3 have the freshest dates. Don't listen to Dean. Expiration is what customers eat. Lot codes are just for the system. Then she turned to Malcolm. You're new? Yes, George. Ruth studied him a second longer than necessary. I remember faces, but it's fine. People forget a lot around here, so I do too. That afternoon, Malcolm noticed something small. Ruth never touched the clock-in machine, not because she forgot, but because she didn't need to. Everyone knew she arrived on time, did her job, and left exactly when she should. Once, the system missed logging one of her days. Ruth didn't file a complaint. When asked, she simply said, If the system thinks I wasn't here that day, maybe I was too faint to be noticed. At the end of the shift, Malcolm overheard a conversation through the break room door left ajar. Dean and the stockroom assistant, a young guy named Cody, were talking about installing a new order system. Cody asked, Should we retrain the baristas? Dean scoffed. None of them are important enough to deserve kindness. A chilling silence followed. No one objected. No one agreed. Just the sound of a pen tapping against the table, as if decency had become a luxury, no longer to be distributed fairly. Malcolm turned away, his chest tightening. He didn't know whether to be angry at the remark, or at himself for once thinking the same way, when signing off on training budget cuts for profitability. He sat on a nearby box, realizing for the first time that kindness hadn't disappeared. It had just been folded up, tucked inside people like Ruth, people the system no longer noticed, but who had never left. That evening, while Malcolm was scrubbing baking trays in the corner, Ruth walked over and gently placed a new pair of gloves on the table beside him. No packaging, no label, just a rubber band keeping them together. This kind insulates better than the old one, in case you're planning to stick around. Malcolm looked up. For the first time, he saw Ruth smile. Not a customer service smile, but the kind of smile that came from someone who had once stood in a different place and understood that sometimes quiet resistance lasted longer than any loud protest. He nodded, accepted the gloves, and didn't ask anything else. Because he understood, real kindness never needs to prove itself with words. At Skybite, the only truly silent time wasn't break hour, it was during inventory count. That was the moment everyone pretended to be focused just to avoid being assigned more work. But for one person, that quiet space felt like a final refuge. Elena. Elena wasn't introduced by anyone. She simply appeared, like a part of the supply shipment, wearing the same uniform, a name tag, but never a smile. Malcolm saw her for the first time in the back storeroom, crouched down, counting ketchup boxes under dim light. Her hands trembled slightly but moved steadily. She didn't take notes on paper. She relied on memory, because her notebook had been confiscated by Dean. The reason? "I don't want random papers messing up the visual flow," Louis whispered to Malcolm. She used to be an accounting major. Really sharp, but Dean publicly berated her in front of a vendor once, just for forgetting to scan a barcode. Since then, no one's really heard her speak. Malcolm didn't ask anything more. He knew some wounds couldn't be healed by kindness alone. They could only be quietly restored by long, steady presence. Wednesday morning, a delivery truck arrived. The vendor was a familiar face, orange-red uniform pulling a cart stacked with deli meats and produce. Dean stepped out to inspect the shipment. Elena was transferring egg trays from the cart to the cooler when she forgot to scan the barcode. Dean didn't look at her. He looked at the vendor and said loudly, "We've got people on payroll who can't count. It's the 21st century, and they still can't scan a barcode. Ridiculous." Elena froze. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't run. She simply set the egg tray down and stepped back into the far corner of the storage room, where the light didn't reach. She didn't cry. Malcolm stood not far away. He didn't intervene. Not because he didn't want to, but because he sensed that stepping in would only add to her humiliation. What she needed wasn't a savior. She needed someone who noticed what wasn't being said. That afternoon, Malcolm passed by Dean's tiny office, the one with a live feed of the security cameras. The door was unlocked. Dean wasn't inside. On the screen, Malcolm watched the footage from that morning. Elena, the egg tray, the vendor. Then suddenly the frame skipped, glitched, and erased. The footage had been overwritten. Malcolm recognized the move. He had once authorized it. The camera loop every 72 hours unless flagged policy, meant to save storage space. But here, Dean had manually unflagged the segment. That meant the incident was officially erased. Beneath the desk, an Excel sheet was open. Elena's time log had been edited. Her lunch break changed from 1 p.m. to 1:17 p.m. On the system notes, left storeroom late, delayed prep, review for potential time deduction. Malcolm paused. For the first time in all his undercover shifts, he wasn't just logging stats. He opened his notebook, where he usually recorded only times and system behaviors, and wrote, "Elena," a voice erased, not by shouting, but by silence. Underneath, he added, "If you take someone's voice away long enough, they learn how to censor themselves." He didn't know what Elena used to sound like, whether her voice was deep or soft, fast or measured. All he knew was, now she avoided everyone's gaze, lowered her shoulders a bit more than the others, and always kept one arm across her stomach, as if she feared her own presence. Before leaving Dean's office, Malcolm left a small change. He turned on the camera's automatic save mode for 7 days. No alerts, no audit trail. He just wanted to make sure, if something happened again, this time silence wouldn't be a shield for the powerful. Spilled coffee isn't usually a big deal, unless the one who spills it is Ruth Delgado and the one who sees it is Dean. It happened at 9:14 a.m. during peak hours. As usual, Ruth was managing the barista station solo, one hand brewing, the other cleaning, barely ever allowing orders to pile up. That day, the order system glitched. A delay in the touch screen caused receipts to print late. An angry customer yelled from the counter, I've been waiting 15 minutes for a decaf. Ruth turned quickly, bumped into the filter paper rack, and the full carafe tilted over the edge. Brown liquid splashed out, spilling onto the carpet right in front of Dean. He froze for 3 seconds, said nothing. Didn't ask if Ruth was okay, didn't look at anyone. Then suddenly he stormed toward the puddle of coffee, voice slicing through even the fryer's mechanical roar. How many times do I have to say, "Don't leave the old lady alone at the barista station"? The entire kitchen froze. So did Ruth. She didn't respond, just bowed slightly, reaching for a cleaning cloth. Dean blocked her, tossed the rag to the floor and barked, "Use your hands." Those old hands of hers. This carpet doesn't need dignity. It needs to be clean. Malcolm moved toward them without thinking. He bent down to pick up the rag, intending to hand it back to Ruth, when Dean struck him on the shoulder. "Not your business. Temporary workers do their job. You don't have authority." A heavy silence blanketed the kitchen. Elena, counting inventory 10 steps away, turned her head. Luis bit his lip, hands gripping the steel tray tightly. Ruth remained there, unmoving, unresisting, slipping off her worn gloves and beginning to scrub the carpet with her bare hands. Malcolm stood still. His eyes didn't leave Ruth's wrinkled fingers, the same hands once steady in every espresso shot, now absorbing hot brown liquid and the stench of humiliation. Dean walked away. Everything resumed as if nothing had happened, but something in Malcolm snapped. It wasn't the first time he'd witnessed employees being demeaned, but this time it was Ruth, the one who had given him the better gloves, the one who never asked who he was, but treated him with that original kind of kindness, the kind that needs no justification. During the lunch break, Malcolm sat with Luis in a corner of the kitchen. He asked quietly, "Why didn't anyone step in?" Luis looked down. "Because the last time someone named Mara called out sick, she even called ahead, Dean reported it as no call, no show, said she abandoned her shift." Malcolm clenched his hand. Luis went on. "After that, everyone's scared. No one dares to speak up for anyone. Around here, if you slip even once, they slap you with a label, unreliable. And once that label's stuck, no one takes it off." Malcolm stayed silent, because he remembered. The fast replace protocol, a system that allowed managers to swiftly remove non-performing personnel to minimize operational delays, was his signature. He'd signed off on it 3 years ago, when training costs were rising and investors demanded peak efficiency from every store. A clean document filled with neutral language, backed by enticing ROI charts. He even remembered the opening line of that proposal. "Sometimes speed is the ultimate loyalty in the service industry." Now those words echoed like a verdict. That night, Malcolm didn't return to his hotel. He stayed in the employee break room, staring at the torn, lost and found board pinned to the wall. He opened his notebook and for the first time wrote in red ink, "Ruth cleaned the carpet, but not my conscience." And beneath that line, "Even kind hands can be stained if we're not fast enough to stop cruelty. Some days don't begin with sunlight, but because you can't take the darkness anymore." Malcolm Raines hadn't slept that night. He stayed in the worn-out employee break room, leaning his head against the back of a plastic chair, listening now and then to the fryer hood rattling in the distance. He had passed the halfway mark, logged enough numbers, noted enough bowed heads, counted enough sighs that no one noticed. But there would be no more notes. It was time to speak. 6:12 a.m. He walked in through the employee entrance for the first time not wearing a uniform. His gray suit jacket was pressed, brown leather shoes, white shirt uncreased. Around his neck, a firm, unmistakable badge. Malcolm Raines, founder and president, Raines Foods, Inc. No one recognized him at first. "Morning, George," Louis said casually. Elena gave the usual small nod. Ruth wasn't there yet. She started her shift later. It wasn't until Dean entered through the side door, Starbucks coffee in hand, chewing gum and barking, "Talia didn't show. Cut next week's shift if she doesn't call back," that Malcolm straightened up in the center of the counter, took off his glasses, removed the fake name tag from his shirt pocket, and let the real badge gleam under the dull fluorescent light of Skybite's ceiling. His voice wasn't loud. No music, no spotlight, only truth. spoken at the right time. Talia didn't show because she's lazy. Number she collapsed on shift 3 days ago after being pushed too far. The kitchen froze. Dean scoffed, turning. Who gave you the right to? I did, Malcolm said, slowly, clearly. He held up the badge for all to see. My name is Malcolm Rains. I founded this company. I was the one who hired the first person to mop the Skybite kitchen floor 18 years ago. Silence. Luis's mouth opened, but no words came out. Elena took half a step back. Dean froze like the sound had been drained out of him. Malcolm turned toward him, not angry, not yelling, just with the calm of someone solving an equation that had already been proven. Dean Carson, your contract is terminated, effective immediately, for threatening and insulting staff, altering system logs, and erasing surveillance footage. Dean stepped back. You can't. I just did. Malcolm pulled out his phone and tapped send on a pre-written email. Security is on their way. You'll be escorted off the premises. Dean looked around. No one spoke. Not a single glance in support. Ruth walked in just then, apron in hand. She stood beside Elena. They both looked at Dean, not with glee, but with confirmation that the silence was over. Dean hissed, You're dismantling operational leadership. You'll regret this, Malcolm replied softly. I didn't come here to strip anyone of their title. I came to return the voices that were taken. Security arrived exactly 3 minutes later. No one touched Dean, but he couldn't take a single confident step because no one bowed to him anymore. As the door closed behind Dean, Malcolm looked around at the team. Luis blinked, lips trembling slightly. Elena gripped her apron strap. Ruth placed a hand gently on Elena's shoulder. No one said a word, but everyone had been heard. Malcolm nodded. Today's shift starts over, but not like before. Today, we're working, not just surviving. Fan Bay, the wall of names that never returned. The list wasn't long, but every name on it cut across the past like a blade. Malcolm had the internal HR department extract the personnel logs for the past 90 days at the Skybite, Pensacola branch. In the database, there were 22 names. Some were marked as no-show, unresponsive to schedule, or simply failed to meet expectations. But when Malcolm cross-checked the shift logs, camera footage, and the testimonies of remaining staff, those reasons didn't hold up. One employee had been coughing for 3 days, called in to report it, but no one answered. The system automatically flagged them as a no-call. Another had requested a shift swap a week in advance to attend her mother's funeral, but received no response. And one name, where Malcolm paused the longest. Vanessa Harper, female, 32, single mother, prep line night shift. Her file had only one note, repeated late arrivals. Recommendation, not eligible for rehire. Malcolm issued a directive to reach out to all 22 names, not through regional managers, not with template emails. He handwrote the instructions. I need to know what happened to them. I need them to be spoken to directly, and I need someone to ask each of them, how were you left behind? 3 days later, 6 replied. 3 declined to return. 2 had moved out of state, but 1 showed up at exactly 7:05 a.m. No announcement. She stood at the delivery entrance, dark hoodie, suntan face, holding a small cardboard box. Vanessa Harper. Malcolm recognized her instantly. She had worked at this branch for 14 months. No operational faults, no violations, until one night when her 4-year-old son had a fever of 102 degrees and she asked to leave 2 hours early. Dean refused. She left anyway. The next day, her name vanished from the schedule. You're George, right? She asked. Malcolm shook his head. He stepped into the light by the receiving counter, gently tugged the badge around his neck. I'm Malcolm Rains, the man who didn't know your son had a fever that night. Vanessa didn't cry. She just stood silently for a long time. Then she said, I didn't come back to ask for anything. I just want to know, does anyone remember that I was here? Malcolm answered softly, not just remembered, appreciated. He walked her through the kitchen. No spotlight, no grand rehiring offer. Just one question. Would you be willing to come back on your own terms? Vanessa nodded. I need a morning shift until 2 p.m. My son's in preschool until 3:30. Malcolm signed the shift adjustment on the spot. No middle-tier approval, no circular explanations. That afternoon, Malcolm held a staff meeting with the entire team. Ruth stood at the center, not in her usual mesh cap, but wearing a new badge. Floor Captain, Ruth Delgado. The title wasn't higher than anyone else's, but the authority was clear, enough to decline unreasonable orders. Ruth was given the right to choose an apprentice. She chose Elena. She doesn't say much yet, Ruth said, but I used to be her. The only difference is, I learned to speak up before I learned to cook well. She's the opposite. Now I want to help her speak again, in her own true voice. Elena bowed her head, face flushed. Malcolm stepped forward and handed her a supplemental contract, clearly stating, apprentice collaborator, mentored by floor captain, exempt from probationary period. No one clapped, but everyone looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, Elena lifted her head and held it for more than a second. Before closing the meeting, Malcolm picked up a blank A4 sheet and wrote in bold, handwritten ink, "Those once dismissed will now be the first to be heard." He pinned it to the shift schedule board, exactly where the faded old sign used to read, "No shift changes without manager approval." Monday morning in Pensacola was unusually cold. The air felt thin, like it was hiding something. Malcolm walked into Skybite with a strange feeling. The shift was in motion, but the urgency was gone. Elena was already at the prep line, hair neatly tied back, apron clean, eyes focused. Ruth was reminding Vanessa to swap the ice water bin before turning to adjust the espresso machine. No one spoke much, but no one bowed their head anymore either. At 9:13, the employee door swung open. A man in a black suit, military-cut hair, cross-body name badge. Gary Bolton, regional supervisor. Following him was a young assistant clutching a clipboard, looking as uneasy as someone walking into a freezer for the first time. Gary entered like he was inspecting equipment, not people. No smile, no greeting. Just a nod that said, "I know better than all of you." He scanned the room, scribbled a few notes, then turned to Malcolm, who was standing beside Elena, checking inventory. "Malcolm," he said, skipping pleasantries, "I've been informed of a serious situation here. I have a list of complaints, but I need to verify how many are exaggerated." Malcolm met his gaze. "None of them are exaggerated." Gary smirked, lips curling. "Things like this happen everywhere. It's the F&B industry. People are sensitive. Raise your voice a little, and it's a threat. Workers lack resilience. Managers are stuck in the middle." He spoke like he was describing the weather, uncontrollable, and best adapted to. Malcolm didn't respond right away. He took one step toward the order counter, where Elena stood motionless. Vanessa had just exited the storage area, carrying a tray of fresh ingredients. Ruth was wiping down a table behind them. Everyone heard. A vendor delivering frozen chicken paused, half dragging his cart. Malcolm turned back to Gary, his voice firm but low, each word precise. "If this happens everywhere, it's exactly because people like you allow it to." Gary raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Malcolm didn't stop. "You're not here to verify. You're here to rationalize, and I will not allow anyone representing Rains Foods to treat employee dignity like it's negotiable." Gary turned to his assistant, whispering, "Call the regional director." Situation escalating. Malcolm raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm the founder of this company, and the only thing out of control here is your relationship with the truth." He turned to the nearby vendor and said, loud enough for the entire line to hear, "I apologize for what you're seeing today, but I need every one of us to be a witness." Then back to Gary. "You are terminated. Effective immediately." Gary stepped back. "You can't do that. I report to regional oversight. And I built the system you've been rotting from the inside." The assistant beside him froze, unhooked Gary's badge from his collar, and quietly placed it on the counter, without a word. Malcolm continued, this time to everyone, staff, vendor, assistant, anyone still standing in the kitchen. "Starting today, Rains Foods adopts a new policy, posted in every location, including corporate headquarters. It contains only 3 words, zero. Tolerance, policy. He paused, then said, no tolerance for insults. No tolerance for threats. No tolerance for anyone, regardless of rank, who disrespects kindness or the mental well-being of our workforce. Elena looked toward Malcolm. Ruth lifted her head, smiling faintly for the first time. Vanessa gave a subtle nod. Luis, just arriving for his afternoon shift, walked in, paused, and understood that something big had just ended. But more importantly, something even bigger had just begun. Malcolm turned toward Gary, who was now clumsily gathering his bag. He didn't look at him for long. He didn't need to. People like Gary don't need a lesson. They need to be removed from the classroom. That morning didn't begin with the sound of the order screen, but with a soft knock at the secondary delivery door behind Skybite. Malcolm was reviewing the shift log when Vanessa called out, "You have a visitor." He stepped out. The door opened, and there she was, in a mint green hoodie, amber. No more sunken eyes. No more paper-thin mask quivering with every cough. She smiled, radiant. In her arms were 3 boxes of chilled salads, the scent of fresh greens still clinging to the lids. "I'm helping my sister deliver today. Just for now. Maybe I'll come back part-time next week if there's still room." Malcolm didn't need to say anything. He nodded. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't just returning to a job. It was returning to trust. After dropping off the delivery, Amber stayed for 5 minutes to chat with Vanessa and Elena. As she turned to leave, Elena quietly said, "Her necklace is really pretty." A short sentence, but the first time Elena had spoken to anyone without being asked. Malcolm stood nearby, watching in silence. No applause, no Employee of the Month sign, just a different kind of quiet, the kind you can breathe in. And he understood. This is when the policy truly begins, not on paper, but in the hearts of the people. Mid-shift, Malcolm called Luis up to the small office. Not for inspection, but for promotion. "You've been leading this team for over a month. Now it's time to make it official." Luis blinked. "Me? Trainer?" Malcolm smiled. "No one teaches better than someone who had to learn while being shouted at." Luis stayed silent. Then after a moment he whispered, "The week Dean yelled at me, I was going to quit. But Ruth gave me a warm roll before my shift. I thought, maybe someone still believes in me." Malcolm replied, "Now it's your turn to believe in someone else." At the same time, Ruth was seated near the barista station, head tilted toward her phone. The screen's glow lit up her face, tired but still precise, her hand pouring espresso shots with practiced accuracy. Malcolm approached. "I just spoke with HR. Starting this month, all employees with 5 years or more will receive 3 paid personal recovery days annually." Ruth raised an eyebrow, half skeptical. Malcolm continued, "I'm recommending you take 3 days, starting tomorrow, to care for your husband." Ruth didn't speak. She didn't thank him. She didn't refuse. She just gave a small nod, like someone who had been overlooked so long that unconditional kindness felt unfamiliar. That afternoon, Malcolm picked up a black marker and walked to the whiteboard behind the counter, once used to write "out of stock" or sanitation reminders, and wrote one bold, steady line, "Right to breathe luxury, it is survival." No one asked what it meant, but each person read it, once, then returned to work. Only this time their posture was different. Shoulders no longer hunched, movements more steady. No one kept checking the clock. No one rushed to avoid another's gaze, because for the first time they were able to breathe. Malcolm's final shift in Pensacola didn't feel like a farewell. There was no cake, no speech, just a regular morning, exactly how the most important things should begin or end. The time clock still beeped with each badge swipe. Ruth was off on her 3-day leave to care for her husband. Luis was training a 17-year-old new hire, hands still clumsy, but eyes focused. Elena was taking orders, not hiding behind the prep line anymore. Vanessa had just moved product from storage to the front, sweat dampening her collar, but she still smiled as Amber passed by. Malcolm stood at the delivery entrance, a small shoulder bag slung over one side. No uniform, no CEO badge. He looked around the kitchen one last time, not to inspect it, but as if saying goodbye to an old version of himself. A version who once believed justice came from executive offices and internal memos. He didn't call for anyone. He simply stepped into the break room, the same room that had once been damp and peeling, now clean, with shift schedules posted, training assignments mapped out, and little notes scattered across the wall. Thanks, Ruth, for last night's shift. Luis, your lemonade saved me this morning. Malcolm pulled a folded sheet of plain white paper from his pocket. He taped it to the wall, right next to the assignment board. No signature, no company logo, just one handwritten line, bold and clear. If you were ever forced into silence, let this wall speak for you. He clipped a marker next to it and walked out. No one saw him leave. No door slammed shut. But minutes later, Amber walked into the break room to grab a water bottle, stopped when she saw the note. She read it silently, then became the first to add something underneath. I used to be afraid to breathe loud. Now I let myself smile. That afternoon, Malcolm didn't return to headquarters. He boarded a flight to Atlanta, the first of 3 more stores on his list. No disguise this time, no fake name tag, but also no camera crew, no request for anyone to organize a welcome. On the flight, he opened his notebook, the old one, fraying at the spine. On the last page, he wrote, "No one needs to be a hero. We just need someone to choose kindness when no one makes them." When the plane touched down in Atlanta, Malcolm carried no 10-step transformation plan. Just one question. How are they being silenced here? And he began again. No more disguises, because this time he had finally become himself. Elena was the first to write, "I was afraid, but I'm still here." Maybe you've been there, standing under the sun, giving everything you've got, and still being told you haven't earned a break. Or maybe you've seen someone kind, like Serena, push past exhaustion just to keep a job. That's not just bad management, that's broken leadership. But it only takes one person to say, "This isn't right," for everything to begin shifting. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, or just the need to believe in better, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories that don't scream. They whisper truth. And if you've ever had a boss like Donnie, or wished for one like Logan, drop a comment below. We're reading. We care.